It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about the viewership numbers for UFC Freedom 250. We're going to talk a little bit more about Josh Hokit's comments on Michelle Obama and the negative attention they're gaining in mainstream press. We're going to talk about Belgrade, and we're going to look at some streamers and how they use live sporting events to drive growth. There's a ton of things we're going to talk about, even Conor McGregor. But if you want access to all of those things, you're going to need to pick up a paid subscription because our episodes are divided into two parts. They're split right down the middle. And the first half is free, but the second half is behind a paywall. So you'll need to pony up a few bucks if you want access to the entire show. And you do, because we put a lot of effort and legwork into our episodes. So definitely pick up a paid subscription. And it helps us keep the lights on. So, you're really helping us out. And we thank you for that. Now, John, how the heck are you? It's a glorious, beautiful, beautiful Thursday, isn't it?
Well, it was kind of raining here earlier today in Minnesota, but it now looks nice. So I have no complaints. I mean, I have some complaints. I always have complaints, but not a lot of complaints.
Listen, it's a glorious day. It could be monsooning right now, and it would be a glorious day.
Oh, yeah. I can tell you're already happy about a story that broke. So we'll get to that eventually. You can barely hold it in.
I can't help myself. It's a great day. To quote Mr. Fred Rogers, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. And it is. So let me start off with what our OG listeners are already accustomed to. And that is, are there any new filings or updates in the UFC antitrust cases?
Absolutely none. Nothing. Zilch. Nada. Nothing came out. So that makes it easy. And I do have one update to a different court case we haven't talked about in a long time, though.
Oh.
Is not a big one. It's just the Musasi versus Bellator sport worldwide lawsuit. Still going on. Just want to point out it's still going on. And the two parties, they jointly requested a 30-day extension of the deadline to resolve raise unresolved discovery disputes. And so they both requested a joint request extension of discovery deadline. So we still have that case going on. The one where Musasi was suing Bellator and PFL over his contract and over monopoly power on the Bellator PFL side. So,
well, all
that's
right.
It.
Hey, if you were to throw a dart and take a wild bet on who would win that case, where would your dart land?
No idea. I mean, we are still nitpicking over various things, so I have no clue. I have very little idea where it even stands, to tell you the truth. That case, it's been dragging on for a while.
A long while.
Yes, yeah.
All right, well, then we shall move on. Let's talk about Josh Hokit for a moment, because his horrible comment about Michelle Obama is gaining a lot of negative mainstream press, and most recently came from an op-ed from Alexis Ohanian, who is Serena Williams' husband, and he was actually in attendance at the event. So his op-ed does two things. It sort of defends his position in being there, but it also absolutely shreds Josh Hokit and UFC for the comment. Do you think this incident could be the biggest catalyst to maybe derail the Revival Act?
I don't think that. I think the biggest thing to derail the Ali Act right now, the updated Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, is just the calendar, as we talked about last
Right.
episode. The congressional calendar right now does not leave much room for them to introduce. Now they still might. Maybe tomorrow Ted Cruz puts it in the new bill, and we move through very quickly. But they have very limited number of weeks available to do the markup, to do the votes, to get it back to a committee to merge the two versions of the bill, to send them back to both chambers and vote on. So that's the number one thing. But this doesn't help. This brings a lot of scrutiny to the UFC that they don't get normally from people that just don't follow the UFC. And I think a lot of people, we're going to talk about as you're waiting to talk about, we're going to talk about the viewership and the numbers this event did. But I think a lot of people, you've seen lately, at least I've noticed a lot in my intersection with the more recent or the people watching the UFC now, because a lot of people that I knew before who were diehard UFC fans used to yell at me all the time because of my positions about, them abusing monopoly power, market power. They've moved on. They're no longer fans of the UFC. They have rejected them, whatever reason. They moved on because they got bored of the sport, which happens to a lot of people, or the politics have turned them off. But the people that are currently fans, not everybody, I'm sure most people listening to this show are not like the people I'm going to describe, but there's a large number of people who are kind of in a bubble about the UFC, about the popularity of it, about, we'll talk about the numbers in a bit, the exaggeration of how many people are going to be watching this, how big it's going to be. Who only certain type of people oppose the event. Only certain type of people are upset. A small group of woke liberals are upset about the comments about Michelle. I don't think they realize, first of all, how small the actual popularity of UFC is overall, the hardcore fan base, and how a lot of their views just are not, quite mainstream. The UFC has they have abandoned their old ways under the Fertittas. Funny enough, the Fertittas they're the guys that kind of made the UFC into a monopoly, but their policy back then was to cast a wider net. Remember, I remember going to events, to bars, and seeing hardcore lesbian feminists showing up to watch Ronda Rousey. That's how, that's the type of net they were casting. They were casting nets that covered everybody. They had gay pride events for the UFC. Remember, they're selling T-shirts for gay pride. They were trying to be they were very non-political. No one really knew where Dana White and the Fertittas stood before Donald Trump showed up politically, because they wanted to appeal to everybody. They were like all the other mainstream sports. We want to cast as wide a net as possible. And since 2016, they've slowly gone down a path where they have kind of narrowed the appeal of the sport to a more of a hardcore, large audience, but a one ideological audience. Their beam is pointed in one direction, it seems. And that audience, if you saw the picture of the event at the White House, did you see that one photo of everybody sitting watching it in the ellipse? Where the whole crowd is.
Absolutely.
It looked like, even the Warriors had some female gangs in the background when they all were gathering for their big meeting. This was just all men, massive sausage fest, all, certain age groups, and not to rag them too hard, but they were, you could kind of tell the politics, the views, very probably non-political in many ways. But it's a manosphere audience, it seems now, that they appeal more to, which is the podcasts. There is, when you see comments about the UFC. Now, again, Twitter is not the real world. X is not the real world. But you just see so many more of these comments now than you used to from UFC fans. There's a lot more anger towards anything they view as, liberal or feminist, or what they view as feminist. Not even, just standard old, positions are now like radical feminism under them. They keep bringing up Joe Biden having the transgender event at the White House. They have a very much more, even strangely more than in the past. Dana White there's a strong fanboyism for Dana White and a strong team alignment with UFC, but that's even seems stronger than it did in the past. Although it's strangely enough, there's also a large wing of the UFC fandom, probably has been around longer, that seems more hostile to the UFC management than it has in the past. So there's that split. But I think a lot of those people on the lawn or the ellipse, they fall into the other category. And so that it seems to be that's an ideological thing they're building up. But I think they're, as much as they want to say, oh, they want the UFC to be the biggest thing in the world, whatever, I don't think they quite realize the potential blowback, or I shouldn't say really the blowback, because it's not people that are fans of the UFC, right? They're not going to lose fans, but they're going to get a hostility. The UFC is going to be labeled a certain way amongst an audience. And I'm already this way. It's hard for me to tell people that I watch the UFC without being a little bit embarrassed, right? Compared to what it was a few years ago. And that's the situation we're in. And I don't think they realize that's the direction they're headed. And so I don't think this particular comment will come up again in the Ali Act, but it might cast the UFC. It's going to strengthen the position of people, as you've seen numerous stories coming out around this event about the UFC's ties to Donald Trump, about the corruption involved in this event, about even the Ali Act had several stories over the last week. The UFC might become viewed amongst Democratic supporters as who don't think about the UFC much at all. They might now start viewing it as this hard right organization that's aligned with Trump, and that makes getting Democratic support to pass bills that much harder. So I think in that sense, it might backfire. It might end up doing something in that direction, but I don't think it directly will. I think most people will forget about it by the time the bill ever gets introduced. It's just the lingering effect of people remembering the UFC is something they do not like, I think is the big threat.
Going back to the bill being introduced, Ted Cruz did introduce a bill this week under emergency circumstances.
Yeah.
And is that telling to you that he has not done the same with the Revival Act?
I can't make a judgment call on this yet, because you would think he was, but I think there's just more interest, more support amongst, college football, college sports has much bigger fan base than the UFC. It's again, a lot of people are in a bubble about a lot of hardcore UFC fans who only watch UFC, I think, are in a bubble about the amount of interest in it. College sports has a massive amount of fans, especially in red states. It's rural red states that don't have their own pro teams. And so I think it just feels that much more important to his constituents than any UFC bill. I bet you Ted Cruz in Texas, there's probably large numbers of UFC fans, but it's still a small amount compared to the college sports fans in Texas.
Believe it or not, here in San Antonio, at least, it's not UFC town. It is definitely boxing town. Like boxing events do Ironman numbers here. And, obviously the Spurs do Ironman numbers. Like we had during the playoffs, and for the conference finals too, like every time the Spurs would win a game, the entire city would erupt in fireworks. Like where I live would erupt in fireworks, and we live in a very quiet neighborhood. My direct next door neighbor are super fans, and he's also a super boxing fan. Like he has a movie room in his house that has all these boxing posters. He has a speed bag hanging, a heavy bag as props for his movie room. It's wild how big a boxing town it is, and I'm certain that it's this way across all of Texas.
I think for Texas especially, because boxing, as we've talked about before, the demographics that are big boxing fans in the United States are mostly Hispanic and Black. Mm-hmm. And so in Texas, you have, large number of Hispanics. Yes. I can tell in LA, this is a boxing town too, LA. You go to certain bars, high numbers of Hispanics, it is full to watch the boxing matches when they're at the bar. Other parts of town, it's, black. My coworkers, black, coworkers, plural. We watch, they don't watch UFC, they watch boxing.
Mm-hmm.
But I know a lot of people too that like MMA as well. But it's just not, it's not as ingrained in those communities. And I think if you go to like Houston, I'm sure there's a lot of boxing fans there. Boxing's big in Texas, but I also think MMA is big in Texas, just with different demographics generally. I mean, there's a lot of overlap. I don't want to, it's very true. I think that MMA is not exclusively, especially compared to what it was, it's not exclusively just white only anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But boxing definitely is much higher concentrated in Hispanic and Black community than MMA ever is.
All right. Let's get down to viewership numbers, because they were released for the UFC Freedom 250 event on Paramount Plus. What were those numbers and how did you think they did?
Oh my, you can barely hold it together for this part. Now, actually it did very well. This is the thing. It did very well when you consider the number of subscribers Paramount has. It has, I cannot remember.
90 million.
Number. Yeah, but it's like 36 million domestically, is it? I think it's 36 million domestically and the rest internationally. And consider it's the middle of the night, and UFC is not super popular in some countries. I'm sure they're in. In some countries they probably are. It probably didn't do that as well in those places. It's only 36 million subscribers in the U.S., but they said as the total viewers, they gave us the numbers. If we work kind of from the small up, in the U.S., live, the show, it averaged 7 million viewers in the U.S., which beats that Fox UFC on One Fox event with Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos, which was the best, most successful UFC event in the United States ever. So beat that, 7 million live in the U.S. It did 1.2 million additionally live in Latin America. On top of that, it did the live average audience, I guess, across the 7 events, when you combine the two, is 8.2 million. And then they did, when you combine the total viewers on Paramount Plus, including those that watched it later, not live, it was 17 million. And that includes the US at 15.3 million and 1.7 million for Latin America. So 17 million, that's a very good, respectable number. Now, I'll save my theory why it took kind of so long to come out with this. No, because they obviously probably had this number a little while ago, a day or two. But the first thing I want to say why it looks bad. Why it looks bad is because Dana White said this would do Super Bowl numbers, right? Yep. Well, the Super Bowl does 125 million. Marco Rubio, this is the dumbest one. He said it would do 1 billion right before the event. A billion people around the world were going to watch it. I don't know who gave him that number or why I would say that, but that is one of the most absurd things I've ever heard. And then this might even be worse in some ways, is Joe Rogan, because this is after the event, after they actually probably had an inkling of the numbers.
I heard it was 150 million people watching.
Yeah, and then he also added that there are probably another 50 or 60 million people have watched it on the day after, because the day or two after, implying that 200 million people had watched it, which is just absolutely absurd. And that's the part that really makes it look dumb, is because they really oversold the public, their audience, on the numbers that were going to watch this. And I'm not certain why they did it. I'm not certain. We just talked about the new demographic of the UFC. Is this the type of people that only get news from them, so it doesn't matter that they can hype them up to believe it's this massive? I'm not sure the reasoning for that, but that's what really hurt it. Now, my theory is, on top of, they also, I should note too, there's another article that talked about using the Sensor Tower data to illustrate Paramount's, number of new subscribers from the event. And they talked about the data, but that data is almost useless to me, because they talked about how, downloads were up 276% from the prior 30-day average, which is 30 days ago. But that's not another event. That's not a true comparison. What I would like to have had, instead of just saying, oh, it did 30, compared to the prior 30 days, it did 34% better and all these numbers. I would like to know if on the day of to the previous numbered event, how did the downloads compare to that? And how did the month leading up to this White House event compare to the month leading up to 328, the Sean Strickland event. That could give us an actual comparison we could work with, right? But it didn't. It just gave us.
What about the fact that they use Nielsen metrics? What do you think of that?
They didn't use Nielsen, you're saying?
They did. And like Fred Garvin said, why is Paramount using Nielsen metrics when they have real-time data of their own?
Oh, yeah. I'm not certain why they did that. I mean, that is a good question. I was wondering that myself, because maybe they thought the numbers looked better. I'm not certain. But my theory is that the delay in handing this out is because they were trying to, and again, this is just a theory, they were trying to massage the numbers as much as possible to see if they could find a way that they could beat the Ronda Rousey event. That's my guess. Because Ronda barely, Ronda didn't blow it away. Ronda did 18 million viewers on Netflix. And even the Netflix numbers, too, are very questionable, to tell you the truth, right? And so that's, there's questions about them. But that's my guess, is that they were, they talked this up a lot. And they wanted to beat the numbers for Rousey, but they didn't do it. And there's no way, people are like, well, I'm sure some people are upset about, again, those type of fans I just talked about, sure, they're kind of frustrated by that. They don't like that Ronda, beat them. But it's understandable. She did, considering she's on Netflix and they're on Paramount, right? And that maybe if they wanted a higher number, they should have put it on CBS. If they wanted a larger number, but they didn't. They specifically put it on Paramount to try to drive people to buy subscriptions. And looking at the subscription numbers, I think they had a sizable increase in the number of subscriptions because of the event. But I'm not sold when you see 276% increase on just a random day, that it's going to come out to be a massive, massive uptick in subscriptions for Paramount Plus because of this event.
All right. Now, let me ask you this. Springing off of that event, do you think that's why Belgrade is offering 2.2 million euro for a UFC event now, which is like 10% of their yearly budget? I mean, is there any way that investment is going to impact their economy positively?
I have no clue. I mean, it's possible. I mean, it is possible that they look at it as a means to draw an audience, that there's the sport is popular. But I mean, there's a lot of other theories that float around why they would do that. Besides the fact that, as I just mentioned, having this event, the tourism board is paying that. It's 2.215 million euros, $2.4 million US dollars for a UFC fight night in Belgrade on top of the ticket sales. So it just guarantees UFC a lot of revenue. Is there such a big UFC fandom in that part of Europe that it could draw a number of people to Belgrade? That's a possibility. It could be tied into potentially other TKO products as well, content that events they might host there. And so when you add it all together, they think it's worthwhile. I've seen, I'm sure people have seen these economic impact reports they do for these events, and they're just full of shit. They really exaggerate the impact of the events. They sell it to local officials, I guess, who can hype it up that they did something. But there is something at the UFC that's worth noting, is that because of its Trump connection, right, there is considered a kind of a geopolitical pipeline to the Trump administration. I mean, we saw that with Bud Light. Bud Light is paying the UFC a ton of money to launder its image to conservative fans after they just got tossed to the curb because they did that one little viral spot with a transgender person, and so. So that's a theory that some people you could float around, and what kind of could add to that theory is we saw that the Serbian government notably approved a massive and controversial real estate deal with our guy Jared Kushner, whose investment firm is supposed to develop a luxury hotel complex on the site of the former Yugoslavian Ministry of Defense in Belgrade, which was bombed by NATO back in 1999. So they're paying the Trump family there. They're cutting deals there. And so it kind of, the UFC is kind of, some people would say, the next logical step if you're trying to, if you have an overarching foreign policy strategy of currying favor with the administration by showing, hey, we are friends with your friends, maybe it's kind of a soft power play. There's also the concept. Now, that's one argument. I'm not saying that's true, but I've seen people, I've talked to people to kind of discuss that possibility. The other one is it's elevating Serbia's profile in the sports washing arena. And so they're paying the 2.2 money. They're paying this premium price, this additional price, because they want to have an event there to make it look like they're a normal country. Serbia has, some regional Balkan geopolitical tensions. They have a little strongmanism thing, authoritarianism in the government in the past. And so it's like we are trying to show that we are a normal country open for business, kind of like how supposedly Saudi Arabia and Qatar used, the UFC events to show that they're just a normal country doing normal business. And then there's also the fact that, as Kareem Zidane and other people have talked about, made links between combat sports and right-wing politics, is that this money, maybe having the UFC there is kind of a domestic political purpose for them, where it's, garners political capital and is a demonstration of nationalism in some ways, because there's, Serbian, we can highlight Serbian fighters. What we got, Rakic, Alexander Rakic, Dusko Todorovic, is that? Yeah.
Todorovic.
And who's the Todorovic? I'm sorry, I mispronounced the name. I'm trying to go off my memory here. Balkan Serbian names screw me up all the time. And then there's who's that guy? Uros Medic?
Uros Medic.
Medic. See, again, I pronounce the C as a hard K. It's my mistake every time. But those guys, they can bring these local stars. Now, maybe there's an audience to see their local stars, because this is, they're not renowned outside of, they are renowned for basketball, though. They have major stars there, but they're not really renowned as a major sports headquarters, Serbia, so they can bring these guys in and exhibit their, domestic stars and have a major event. That's a possibility. But if you think of it as a political thing, if this is a form of, political, political capital for the domestic market, then you bring these tough guys that represent your country, and it can appeal to those type of nationalistic Serbians. But, that's all, you put those together, that's the four possibilities. Any of those could be correct. Or maybe several of them are, but all it does is just drives up the price for the site fees. And the other thing that helps is that since the UFC has a lockdown on the elite level MMA, they kind of control access to these events. And so they can kind of dictate a price. You have to pay this premium to get them to come there. Otherwise, you might just be negotiating with multiple promoters like you do in boxing. And, you would say, well, I am not going to give you this massive site fee for this event. I will go to this other promoter and he will take a cut. He'll take a smaller amount to bring the event here because I have multiple bidders. It's the reverse of a fighter having multiple people bidding for their services. So the UFC has an advantage there as well. But take your pick, whatever one of those reasons, but I think there's a possibility any of them could be correct or multiple of them. You could take maybe several of them and say, those are the reasons this is happening and why they're paying so much.
Sports Business on Twitter, that's their handle, Sports Business, had a report which is called Sports and the Streamers, and it shows how streamers are using live sporting events to drive growth. And there's a neat little graphic that goes along with it. Was there anything notable from their reporting on that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what notable per se. It's not like it's super new information, but we knew this was going on. Let's put it that way, right? We knew that this is kind of what they were doing, pivoting to advertising. But it is nice that amongst the report, it kind of did a breakdown of what each service, how they kind of work. It's also interesting is they lumped DAZN in there, right? Mm-hmm. It's this platform that really has no subscribers in the United States is included in there. But as they showed, with YouTube, it's almost all exclusively advertising. There's a third of the revenue from subscriptions, a very small percent from others, pay-per-views, video on demand, bundling with other content or other streamers, betting services. And then the vast majority, about 2/3 from advertising. For Netflix, it's reversed. Almost 95%. I think it's at 95% is from subscription base, tiny bit from the betting, pay-per-views, and those things, and 3% from advertising. And the advertising though for Netflix interests, they're just starting that. They're expanding that with the live content they're doing. On the betting or pay-per-view for Netflix, that 2%, I got a feeling that takes place mostly out of the United States. I think that's a service, if I remember right. And this, again, I don't remember this being reported in the article, but I remember that. I think that's in India. They do a service like that. And then Apple's 100% subscriptions. And then you see the Zone is in Prime Video are more mixed, still 75, 80% subscription, but more advertising. They seem to be the middle ground of all those. But it kind of shows all these avenues of revenue, and they're all kind of, they're all adding the tiers. They all started in one, and they're kind of expanding them. And that was, I found that somewhat interesting. I don't know if it's, if most people are, that's the type of show we are. We're kind of enamored with that stuff. But I think it shows one thing it shows where growth are probably going to happen is by all those services getting growth in those other fields. Now, what does that mean for combat sports? Well, one thing's good. If let's say you're a service that's based completely on advertising and you want to start offering pay-per-views, well, combat sports has a long tradition of allowing, of having a pay-per-view price. So I could potentially, I mean, I don't know if it's the best model, but you could potentially see something like combat sports, YouTube making a push for it, right? Because everybody has YouTube. And so you could offer for a price, and some promoters are doing this at the low end, but the higher end could probably think about offering this is getting on YouTube and offering a pay-per-view, additional pay-per-view price. I'm also waiting for Netflix to expand that into the United States because, again, they have a massive reach. And you could see someone deciding to get on work with Netflix and have two different types of shows on Netflix for combat sports. One is the mass appeal; it's going to get a huge number. We can get advertising revenue that way, right? But the way combat sports tends to work is that some events are not really appealing to the masses, but a large number of hardcore fans are willing to dish out money for it. And those events can be extremely successful. So, I mean, again, they show these multiple ways to increase the pie, at least for the platform and probably for the promoter. But I could see all of them they all seem to be going in a direction where they have these different models, but maybe eventually they come to a place where they're all kind of doing the same thing, trying to maximize each of them.
All right. Now, UFC has been pushing Conor McGregor lately through the media circuit, most recently on Jimmy Fallon's show. But he's been receiving lots of backlash due to his rape conviction, and Jimmy Fallon himself has been receiving a bunch of backlash as well. How badly do you think that this could impact sales for UFC 329?
Well, again, we got to go back to that previous conversation we had about the new fan base and how it's the fans are in kind of their own bubble. We're a niche sport. I mean, really a niche. It's a large niche, but it's still a niche sport. And so I say it's not going to impact it at all. And a lot of those guys, I mean, you look at the responses to any, there are, again, this kind of shows the bubble they're in. They don't see the blowback that happened with the Michelle Obama comment. Because partly, I think the highlighting of Conor McGregor's civil rape case, because he does not have a criminal conviction, but God damn it, the evidence seems pretty fucking strong there when you read it, doesn't it? on that civil case that he lost, that been brought to light, I think, in many ways because people were outraged over the Michelle Obama. And, then they see Conor McGregor, this guy that it looks to them, and it looks to some other people over here, that he may have gotten away with rape. That's the reason it got highlighted so much and probably shared so much on X. And that's kind of the risk the sport kind of plays by catering to a certain type of audience too much. But in the case of that audience, the case of the UFC audience, they don't care. And I kind of understand at the same time, because my position is not to, these people are prize fighters And the history of prize fighting is that some people are good, some people are cool, but you find out that a lot of them are terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to hold a view of like not caring whatever they do outside the cage and try not to even learn what they do outside the cage, what their lives are like, so I can just enjoy them in the cage. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of time, it's kind of like the artist and the art thing where you spend a lot of time like, wow, I can't believe how terrible this person is. And so that's the way I look at it. But in this situation, I think with UFC fans, MMA fans, it's not going to hurt them at all, but it's going to add ammunition to those that are starting to form an opinion of the UFC, especially those that probably maybe didn't have that opinion before because it was under the radar. But you throw this back to back, because again, I think this is a bigger issue on social media precisely because of the Michelle Obama comments. And you put those together and it starts painting a picture like there is something extremely wrong from some people's point of view. There's something extremely wrong with MMA and the UFC, that these people are the kind of the stars, the faces of
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!